close shut the jaws of Oblivion.
Like a mythic dawn cultist popping out of a secret room to stab the Emperor in the back.
Stranger, you chose a bad day to take up our cause of the Septim.
A remaster of the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion has shown up out of nowhere, and it's a dagger I've gladly thrown myself onto for over 100 hours in about a week. With the original very clear in my mind after recently revisiting it, the Unreal tinted glasses of this nostalgia trip modestly modernize one of my all-time favorite open-world RPGs.
He saw something in you, trusted you.
An improved UI, revised leveling system, and graphical overhaul have made this nearly 20-year-old classic massively more playable.
Aye.
That said, I've also seen a disappointingly recognizable amount of jank and poor performance, and the mostly unchanged enemy scaling apparatus hasn't gotten less irritating with time. And yet, as someone who considers myself pretty immune to the charms of nostalgia alone when a game hasn't aged well, I had a fantastic time returning to this adorably weird open-world adventure, and will likely lose even more hours to it in the coming weeks as I tie up loose ends in the Shivering Isles.
These are the closing days of the Third Era, and the final hours of my life.
If you've never played the original Oblivion, it's your typical massive open-world fantasy RPG from the folks who would go on to bring us Skyrim and more recently Starfield. It's also from an era where the designers at Bethesda provided fewer guardrails and wrote stronger stories.
Who are you? How did you get this?
You'll level up your character in everything from casting destructive magic to repairing your armor as you seek stronger loot, complete quests, and steal everything in sight in typical RPG fashion. Most of the stuff you'll do, like rise up the ranks of the Dark Brotherhood and unravel a plot of murder and betrayal, is incredibly enjoyable and has withstood the test of time. Meanwhile, other aspects, like the procedurally generated Oblivion levels you're subjected to frequently, have fared less well, and serve as glowing reminders of problems Bethesda never quite figured out how to resolve. This series of massive, open-world gallivants aren't known for having the most focused, noteworthy stories, but Oblivion actually surprises in this regard. For my money, it's some of Bethesda's best work, especially when it comes to the all-important faction questlines. The Dark Brotherhood and Thieves Guild stories in particular have lived rent-free in my head for the better part of 2 decades, and I was pleasantly surprised to see they've aged like fine wine.
For his silence, not the symphony of death.
The included Shivering Isles expansion area, which throws you into an Alice in Wonderland-like world of madness, remains one of the best DLCs ever made, with a surprisingly compelling story given to such a seemingly silly character in the Mad God Sheogorath.
Now, get going, before I change my mind. Or my mind changes me.
Even the main quest, which has you finding the bastard son of a slain emperor to stop an otherworldly invasion, is actually much better than I remembered it being, with Sean Bean's Martin having a genuinely touching character arc that I found myself quite invested in.
I know I would be dead by now if it weren't for you. Thank you.
Don't get me wrong, there's nothing as meaningful and well-written as you'd find in a more story-focused RPG like The Witcher 3, and there are plenty of forgettable characters with stilted dialogue to go around, but I'd still put it well above the average for this type of game.
They say it's the dragon blood that flows through the veins of every septim. They see more than lesser men.
It probably goes without saying that the graphical upgrade is Oblivion Remastered's biggest improvement, and the efforts of the team at developer Virtuous are a sight to behold. While things definitely don't look anywhere near the normal standards of a big-budget game built from the ground up today, putting this version side by side with its 2006 doppelganger is eye-raisingly impressive. The entire map is crisp, with a draw distance my teenage self could have only dreamed of. Lighting, shadows, and character lip-syncing in particular have been overhauled so much that it's actually kind of shocking. That said, other things bizarrely didn't get the memo. The NPCs' faces, for instance, are almost universally hideous and cartoonish, and have about a 40% chance of being cross-eyed.
Goodness, what can I say?
Although honestly, being horrified by character faces might actually be part of the authentic Oblivion experience.
I'm Fellas Sarandis. Don't breathe on me.
On balance though, it's still a total glow-up, It's one of those situations where everything looks like I fondly remember it instead of how it actually did, which speaks to how the spirit and style of the original has been maintained. Beyond the glossy new look though, perhaps the thing that has had the biggest impact on gameplay is the simple inclusion of a sprint button. If you haven't played Oblivion in over a decade, you might be shocked to hear that no, there was no sprinting. And if you never played the original, just understand that you'll never truly know this gift you've been granted from Akatosh himself. I don't even really mind that I'm now losing stamina by sprinting, something that usually annoys me in RPGs where you're literally always running around. It's worth it, even if it does have the odd side effect of making the entire map feel smaller, especially cities and dungeons that can now be fully explored in about half the time. This change has also made me care a whole lot more about investing in skills and magical buffs that increase my stamina, since now I'm using that meter for nearly everything I do. But despite the extra fiddling that causes, moving through areas I already know like the back of my hand makes for a remarkably less tedious time. Unfortunately, one of the areas where Oblivion needed the most improvement was its leveling system and how enemies scale with you as you progress. And while some tweaking has been done to make it feel less unfair, it remains deeply flawed. Previously, you could only level up your character by improving your primary class skills, like destruction for a mage or heavy armor for a warrior. But if you focused on doing that, enemies would scale with you and beat you to a pulp with their high-level gear, since you were unlikely to be as well-rounded or intentionally statted out as they are. This made the mid-game a real pain, until you eventually got over that hump and retook your place as a geared-out badass. In Oblivion Remastered, they've melded that leveling system with Skyrim's version, in which everything you do increases your level, and that makes for a significantly less frustrating climb against opponents that arbitrarily become more dangerous across the entire game world. Now I didn't feel punished for focusing on my primary skills first, boosting my level before I was properly powered for the more lethal enemies that progression brought with it. But that core problem of enemies scaling out in the world is still a bummer of a mechanic that has aged like spoiled sweet rolls. It doesn't exactly feel great to spend 50 hours building up your character to then discover that regular-ass bandits out in the world are now rocking full sets of shiny glass armor, mostly invalidating your hard-earned progress. This remaster deftly succeeds at maintaining all the things I loved and despised about Oblivion in a clear effort to keep it as close to the original vision as possible. And that's both a good thing and my biggest critique of the whole undertaking. A lot of how much you're likely to enjoy a playthrough is going to come down to your personal history and experience with Bethesda's RPGs. If you've been gaming for a few decades already and your nostalgia is great enough to help you forgive some pretty clear outdated game design decisions, then you're in for an awesome trip. But if you're new to Oblivion, or simply don't possess a natural fondness for retro-style role-playing, then you'll probably find yourself less enthused when, for example, you run through the 30th or 40th nearly identical Oblivion gate. As for me, I find myself somewhere in the middle. I really love this game, even as I'm well aware and quite incapable of overlooking its many flaws. Would we have been better served if Bethesda and Virtuous had thrown out the old rulebook and done a proper ground-up remake? Maybe, maybe not. But the decision to stick as close as possible to recreating Oblivion as it existed in 2006, but prettier and slightly less irritating, has certainly put a ceiling on how much this Elder Scrolls Redux can really blow me away. There's another caveat to mention too. Although Virtuous did some great work, they're not miracle workers. This is still a Bethesda game through and through, and that comes with a lot of bugs. I saw everything from broken quest objectives to Oblivion gates disappearing before my eyes, and dozens of other issues. On more than one occasion, I've even found myself stuck underneath a rock in an area where enemies were nearby, so I wasn't able to fast travel away, meaning I had to choose between praying to Akatosh that the baddies would creep near enough for me to kill them through the environment, or just give up and reload to a previous checkpoint. Beyond that, Oblivion Remastered performs increasingly worse the longer you play it, presumably because I monkeyed with the world enough to cause it trouble trying to keep track of where I left a specific piece of cheese. My Xbox Series X dropped frames and hitched with regularity, textures loaded right in front of me, and after about 40 hours, I started encountering hard crashes and game freezes every few hours like clockwork. Most of the stuff didn't deter me from sinking an ungodly amount of time into blasting Daedra with fireballs, but it's definitely a bummer to see that 2 decades wasn't long enough to fix this janky fantasy world. In some cases, it appears to perform even worse than I remember the Xbox 360 doing, which is almost impressive.
It's you. Hi. Hello. What's going on with you?
What's this about?
The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion Remastered is an awesome nostalgic adventure that recaptures most of what I loved about the 2006 original while sanding down many of its roughest edges. The result is a fantastic open-world RPG that's aged quite well, with quest lines and stories that are better than I remembered.
It is a doorway, an invitation. Perhaps you will accept it for what it is.
Modernizations, like the slightly improved leveling system that removes some of the friction of the original, and loads of opportunities to make this adventure whatever you want it to be via the plentiful freedom afforded to you. On the other hand, not enough has been done to make this thing significantly less buggy than it notoriously was back in the day, and some design choices, like the enemy scaling and procedural Oblivion levels that become dull fast, have not been improved, which feels like a squandered opportunity. Even so, I never expected to so thoroughly enjoy replaying this uniquely goofy RPG, and I am so glad I took this walk down memory lane, now with the option to sprint down it.
Executive Reviews editor Tom Marks here with Travis Northup. Travis, for people who don't know, you've surely seen Travis around on IGN. He is IGN's most prolific reviewer, actually. Nobody reviews more games for IGN than Travis. If you haven't seen his reviews, has reviewed in the RPG space Avowed, our Fallout 76 re-review in 2024, I believe it was, Asgard's Wrath in VR, if you've played that one, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, but you're also just sort of a jack of all trades. You touch on a lot of different genres. You also review the Destiny stuff for us and ARPGs like Diablo. You're everywhere. But specifically, I was really happy that you were able to review Oblivion Remastered for us because you are sort of a self-described Oblivion sicko. When I asked you to review this, you said, yeah, I could beat the entire campaign in 3 hours, in an afternoon, because you've got the whole thing memorized. Can you just tell me about your history with this game specifically?
Yeah. As you put it, Oblivion Sicko pretty much sums it up. Basically the first game I ever truly became obsessed with was the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. I was in middle school when that game was out on the original Xbox, and I used to carry the map in my backpack to school, and I would plan what I was going to do the next day. That evening after school, I would take out the map at lunch because I had no friends. So that is what we're dealing with in terms of the level of unhinged kind of obsession with Elder Scrolls. So Oblivion came out when I was a sophomore in high school, and I spent every minute of my spare time playing that game, man. I remember the map. I know where all the Daedric shrines are by heart. I don't have to look stuff up. I just know this game like the back of my hand. And so I was very happy to be playing this game again.
Well, so here's the question then. You know this game really well. Does that make the process of reviewing a remaster harder or easier for you? Because I imagine it speeds things up, but when you're trying to now look at this new re-release with somewhat clear eyes and thinking about it from the perspective of people who might be coming in completely fresh, how do you account for that?
For me, it makes it easier because the thing about me playing a lot of Oblivion means that I'm not particularly blind to its faults. If anything, I'm extremely acutely aware of them. And so, I had things fresh in my mind, like the fact that Oblivion never had a sprint button. That was something that I think a lot of people forgot. I was talking to Mitchell Saltzman, and he was like, wait, did it really not have sprint in the original? I'm like, yeah, dude, it did not, So being aware of the stuff that it did poorly and then knowing how the remaster improved on that, and the areas that it very explicitly did not improve on, like the Oblivion gates all being procedurally generated kind of messes of levels, that sort of stuff. So for me, it was more of an asset, but I'm also not somebody who is very forgiving to games, even ones that I love, about their shortcomings. So
in the pantheon of RPGs, or maybe we'll focus in on sort of this style of RPG, first-person action RPG. What do you like in that style specifically? What appeals to you about it? And then also just sort of generally, What do you like? What do you go to? What do you gravitate towards in an RPG?
Generally speaking, I tend to like games that offer more freedom, even if that means the game is a little jankier, which is why I love Morrowind so much, right? That is a perfect example of a game that really did not understand how much freedom they were offering the player and how that was a really bad idea, which is why that game is so niche, right? But the things you can do in that game are absolutely insane. You can enchant your shoes to make it so that you can jump across the entire map. You can increase your acrobatics by like 1,000 levels and then jump across the map. Of course, you'll then die when you hit the ground from fall damage. But like, yeah, you can do it. Go for it, right? Have fun. I tend to really like games like that where you can just kind of go hog wild. They create kind of a parameter for you to exist within, and then you can kind of do your own thing.
All right. Let's shift a little bit back to the remaster remake question and talk about kind of IGN's philosophy around that in general and how you approach it, because there's always this eternal question when we go up to a remaster or remake for a review of, are you reviewing the game that it was, or are you reviewing the improvements and the changes that have been made to that game? And IGN specifically, like, we try to take it a little bit case by case and also, account for the fact that somebody's going to be returning to this game and know everything like you did, but also this is going to be a lot of people's first times with it. And you have to factor that in. But I want to hear from you on sort of how you approach that philosophy of reviewing something that has existed, but obviously has a lot of changes alongside that.
I think the answer is both. Obviously, the review and the score is about the game as it stands. It has nothing to do with like how it compares to the original. It's just, is the game good or not? Is it worth my time or not? But I think the context matters, right? What are the specific areas that it improved on versus the original? Why should I think about going back to this if I've already played it? Or if I haven't played it, is it worth giving this game a try finally? And so I think the answer is kind of both. But if you really pushed me to say one or the other, I would say it's its own review. And that's kind of how I position it. But a lot of what I write about in my review is kind of comparative, because that context, I think, matters.
You're saying basically it's its own review. You're treating it as your own thing, but you're not also reviewing it in a vacuum, right?
Correct. Yeah. Like any other game, right? Like if a sequel to a game comes out, you're going to be talking about the other game that maybe they played or maybe they didn't. That doesn't impact the score or your critical assessment of that game, but it does matter that they improved certain things or didn't improve other things, or that it does this thing worse than a competing game that just came out last week, etc. So that comparison can be helpful when you're evaluating a game, but it's not the end all be all of like whether or not it gets an 8 or a 9 or whatever.
Yeah, there's a dance to that for sure, where comparison is very helpful. It's very good shorthand for people who are familiar with a genre or a series, but also there's that temptation to over compare that we really do actively try to avoid. It's something I take an eye to in the edit process for sure.
I'm guilty of that, by the way. So
I think we all are. Travis, it was lovely talking with you, digging into your Oblivion Remastered review a little bit more. Thank you so much for that. If you're looking for some other reviews from Travis, his last review was Mandragora Whispers of the Witch Tree, for a different style of RPG if you want a 2D side-scrolling one. Another big RPG recently, Claire Obscure Expedition 33, has been blowing up everywhere, so you can check out that review. And for everything else, stick with IGN.